Somewhere in the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, monks have been guarding a Bible that the rest of the world was never supposed to read. It has 22 extra books, secret teachings, buried prophecies, and 2 years ago, an AI scanner was pointed at its most damaged, unreadable pages and recovered words that had been invisible for 2,000 years. Words that Jesus reportedly spoke after his resurrection. What those words say has divided historians and left theologians completely speechless. There are 13 ancient religious secrets buried around the world that history never taught you. Join us and let's discover the hidden secrets that ancient religious texts have been keeping from humanity. Let's go.
Number 13. Ethiopian Bible. Most people alive today have never heard of it, but the Ethiopian Bible is arguably the most complete, most ancient, and most suppressed sacred text on earth. While the version of the Bible used across the Western world contains 66 books, the Ethiopian Bible contains 88. That's 22 additional books, hidden chapters, lost prophecies, and secret teachings that were deliberately cut from the canon used by Rome and every church that followed. Think of it this way. Imagine you've been reading a novel your entire life, and someone just handed you the full version with 100 extra pages that completely reframe the story. That's what the Ethiopian Bible is. These extra books include texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Kebra Nagast, writings that describe fallen angels, hidden cosmologies, and a version of Christian history that Rome found too dangerous to distribute. The Ethiopian Bible is written in an ancient language called Ge'ez, one of the oldest languages still used in religious practice today. So old and so specialized that very few people alive can read it fluently. For centuries, that linguistic barrier acted like a vault. The truths inside were completely inaccessible to the outside world. Ethiopian monks didn't see this as a problem. They saw themselves as guardians, preserving the unfiltered, uncorrupted message of Christ, while the rest of the world received an edited version. And what's actually written inside those hidden pages? What did the AI uncover when it scanned the most damaged sections?
Number 12. Codex Gigas. It is the largest medieval manuscript ever created. Nearly 1 meter tall, weighing 75 kilograms, roughly the weight of an adult human being, bound in a cover made from the skin of 160 donkeys. The Codex Gigas is so massive that a single person cannot lift it. And inside its pages is something that has disturbed every scholar who has studied it for 8 centuries. A full-page, shockingly detailed portrait of the devil himself, staring directly at the reader. This isn't symbolic artwork. It's a deliberate, startling image positioned at the very center of what is supposed to be a sacred Christian text. The legend surrounding the Codex Gigas says it was written in a single night by a monk who made a deal with the devil to complete it before dawn, in exchange for his soul. Historians dismiss the legend, but they can't explain the manuscript. Analysis shows it would have taken one person writing continuously, without rest, for approximately 20 years to produce this volume. The handwriting never changes, not once across 310 surviving pages. No variation in style, pressure, or letter formation, as if written in a single unbroken session by the same hand. Beyond the devil portrait, the Codex contains the complete Latin Bible, medical texts, a calendar of saints, and magical formulas. It was captured as war loot in 1648 and has been locked in a Swedish museum ever since. The Czech people have been requesting its return for decades. It remains one of the most visually striking and theologically bizarre objects in the history of Christianity. A Bible that features Satan as its centerpiece, with no explanation that has ever fully satisfied anyone.
Only 1% of people know the dark truth behind what we are about to show you next. If you want to be part of the few who actually know what's happening in the world, subscribe and leave a like right now. Done? Look at this.
Number 11. Nag Hammadi. In 1945, an Egyptian farmer digging near a cliff face in Upper Egypt accidentally struck a sealed clay jar with his mattock.
Inside, 13 leather-bound books buried in the desert sand for over 1,600 years. The Nag Hammadi Library, 52 separate texts written in Coptic, turned out to be one of the most explosive archaeological discoveries in the history of Christianity, because what these texts contained directly contradicted the version of Jesus that the Roman Church had spent centuries establishing as the only truth. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the secret book of John. These weren't fringe writings. They were early Christian texts, some potentially as old as the canonical Gospels, that had been deliberately buried or destroyed across the Roman Empire after the Council of Nicaea decided which books belonged in the Bible and which ones had to disappear. The Gospel of Thomas alone contains 114 sayings attributed directly to Jesus, none of which appear in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Some of these sayings describe a Jesus who teaches that the kingdom of God is already inside every person, requiring no priest, no church, and no institutional mediation to access. That idea that you can reach God directly, without a hierarchy standing between you, was precisely what the early Roman Church considered most dangerous. These texts weren't hidden by enemies of Christianity. They were hidden by Christians, protecting documents they believed were sacred from an institution that had decided those documents needed to be erased.
Number 10. Roslin Chapel. 15 miles south of Edinburgh, Scotland, there is a small chapel that has generated more conspiracy theories, treasure hunts, and unsolved mysteries per square meter than almost any other building on Earth. Roslin Chapel was built in 1446 by William Sinclair, a Scottish nobleman with documented connections to the Knights Templar. And from the moment construction finished, people have been trying to figure out what is hidden inside its walls. The chapel is covered floor to ceiling, pillar to arch, with over 110 carved stone heads and hundreds of intricate symbols. Among them, researchers have identified what appear to be carvings of corn and aloe plants, crops that were native to the Americas. The chapel was completed in 1486. Columbus didn't reach America until 1492. Either the carvings depict something else entirely, or someone who built this chapel had knowledge of the New World 6 years before Europe officially discovered it. The most persistent theory is that Roslin Chapel sits directly above a vault containing treasures brought to Scotland by the Knights Templar after their persecution in 1307, possibly including the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or the mummified head of Jesus Christ. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the 1990s confirmed the existence of a vault beneath the chapel floor. The current owners, the Sinclair family, who have maintained the chapel for 6 consecutive centuries, have refused all requests to excavate. The vault remains sealed. Whatever is inside has not been touched in over 700 years.
Number 9. Shroud of Turin. It is a 14-foot linen cloth, and on its surface is the faint brown image of a man, front and back, bearing wounds consistent with crucifixion. The Shroud of Turin is either the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ, making it the single most important artifact in the history of religion, or it is the most sophisticated forgery ever produced in human history. There is no middle ground. The image on the shroud cannot be explained. Scientists have been trying for decades. It is not paint, no pigment has been found. It is not a photograph. Photography didn't exist in the medieval period when some dated. The image sits only on the very surface of the linen fibers, penetrating less than 0.2 micrometers deep, thinner than a single human cell. No known technique, ancient or modern, can reproduce this. When the shroud was photographed for the first time in 1898, the photographer Secondo Pia nearly dropped his developing tray in shock. The negative of his photograph revealed a positive image, a fully dimensional, anatomically perfect human face emerging from the film. The shroud only makes visual sense as a photographic negative, which means whoever created it, whether in the 1st century or the 14th, somehow encoded it in a format that required 19th century technology to fully see.
Carbon dating in 1988 suggested a medieval origin, but subsequent research identified contamination in the samples. The Vatican has never definitively declared it authentic or fraudulent. The mystery remains completely open.
Everything we thought we knew about the origins of human civilization was based on one assumption: that organized religion came after agriculture. Humans settled down, grew food, built cities, and then built temples. That was the sequence. Göbekli Tepe destroyed that assumption completely. Discovered in southern Turkey in 1994, Göbekli Tepe is a complex of massive stone pillars arranged in circles, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing 10 to 20 tons each, carved with extraordinarily detailed reliefs of animals, symbols, and human figures. It is the oldest known religious structure on Earth, built approximately 11,600 years ago. That is 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. And here is what makes it scientifically destabilizing. There is no evidence of permanent settlement around it. No homes, no agricultural infrastructure, no city. People built this enormous, sophisticated religious complex before they had farms, before they had villages, which means the conventional sequence is backwards. Religion didn't emerge from civilization. Civilization may have emerged from religion. The people who built Göbekli Tepe then deliberately buried it, filling the entire complex with rubble and sealing it underground. Archaeologists have excavated less than 5.
Number 7. Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard something shatter. Inside, he found clay jars containing ancient scrolls wrapped in linen. What followed was one of the most significant and most suppressed archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained nearly 900 manuscripts, including the oldest known copies of almost every book in the Hebrew Bible, predating previously known versions by over 1,000 years. But the texts that shook scholars most weren't the biblical ones. They were the unknown ones, writings from a community called the Essenes, who lived in the caves of Qumran, isolated from society, practicing ritual purity and preserving knowledge they believed was too sacred for the general population. The Essenes described a coming messianic figure in terms that closely mirror the Jesus of the New Testament, written before Jesus was born. They practiced communal living, rejected wealth, performed ritual baptism, and shared sacred meals of bread and wine. Sound familiar? The Dead Sea Scrolls suggested that early Christianity didn't emerge from nowhere. It emerged from a pre-existing tradition of radical Jewish spirituality that Rome had no knowledge of and no control over. Most disturbing, a significant portion of the scrolls were held exclusively by a small team of scholars for nearly 40 years after discovery, with no explanation given for the delay. Full public access wasn't granted until 1991. What was so sensitive that it required 4 decades to release? That question has never been satisfactorily answered.
Number 6. Ark of the Covenant. The most sacred object in all of Abrahamic religion, the golden chest that God himself allegedly instructed Moses to build, containing the original stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, has been missing for approximately 2,600 years. The last confirmed historical reference to the Ark places it in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem around 600 BC. Then it vanishes. No record of its capture, no record of its destruction, no archaeological trace, just silence. The leading theory among Ethiopian scholars, backed by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church with total institutional certainty, is that the Ark never disappeared. It was moved. Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, brought it to Ethiopia during a visit to his father in Jerusalem. It has been in the city of Aksum ever since, housed in a small treasury building beside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion,
guarded 24 hours a day by a single monk called the Guardian, a position held for life, never leaving the premises, never allowing anyone inside. No outsider has ever been permitted to see it. No photograph exists. No independent verification has ever been conducted. When journalists have pressed for access, the answer is always the same. The Ark is too sacred and too dangerous for public exposure. The Ethiopian Church has maintained this claim with absolute consistency for over 2,000 years. And here is what makes dismissing it difficult. They were saying this centuries before it became a famous mystery. They weren't responding to Western curiosity. They were simply stating what they had always known.
Number 5. Mary Magdalene. For nearly 2,000 years, the official position of the Western Church was clear. Mary Magdalene was a repentant prostitute who followed Jesus out of gratitude. That characterization shaped art, theology, and popular culture across 20 centuries. It was also completely fabricated. There is not a single verse in the Bible that identifies Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. The label was invented in 591 AD when Pope Gregory I delivered a sermon conflating her with two entirely different women mentioned in the Gospels, a factual error that the Catholic Church officially acknowledged and corrected in 1969. But the damage was permanent, because the real Mary Magdalene, the one who actually appears in the biblical text, is a profoundly different figure. She is the first person to witness the resurrection. In John's Gospel, Jesus appears to her before anyone else and instructs her to tell the disciples what she has seen. That makes her, technically, the first Christian missionary. The Nag Hammadi texts go further. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, discovered in Egypt in 1896, describes her as Jesus' closest disciple, the one he trusted with teachings too advanced for the others. In it, Peter explicitly challenges her authority, asking why Jesus would share secret knowledge with a woman rather than with them. The text suggests the early church's suppression of Mary Magdalene wasn't accidental. It was a calculated erasure of a figure whose prominence threatened the male hierarchy that was consolidating power in the decades after the crucifixion. Number 4. King Solomon. He built the most sacred structure in Jewish history, authored 3 books of the Bible, and allegedly commanded an army of demons using a magical ring. King Solomon is simultaneously one of the most historically documented figures in ancient religion and one of the most mythologically strange. The biblical account describes his wisdom as literally supernatural, a direct gift from God, and his wealth is so extreme that silver was considered worthless in Jerusalem during his reign. Archaeological excavations across Israel, Jordan, and Ethiopia have confirmed the existence of massive copper mining operations dating to Solomon's era, suggesting the biblical account of his wealth is not exaggeration. But the texts that never made it into the Western Bible describe something far more disturbing. The Testament of Solomon, an ancient text preserved outside the canonical Bible, claims Solomon controlled 72 demons, binding them using a seal ring given to him by the archangel Michael and forcing them to build the temple in Jerusalem. Each demon is named, described, and assigned a specific supernatural function. Scholars debate whether this text is historical, allegorical, or something else entirely. What they cannot debate is its age. It predates most of the New Testament. The text also claims Solomon eventually lost control. He gave his ring to a woman who gave it to a demon, and the kingdom collapsed from within. The Bible confirms the kingdom collapsed. It just doesn't explain why in a way that has ever fully satisfied historians.
For thousands of years, the locations described in ancient religious texts were considered either symbolic or simply lost to time. The Garden of Eden, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, the route of the Exodus, Noah's landing site. Scholars treated these as theological narratives, not geographic coordinates. Then satellites changed everything. NASA and independent archaeologists began applying multispectral imaging, technology originally developed for military reconnaissance, to the surface of the Middle East. What they found underneath the desert sand was staggering.
In 2010, archaeologist Dr. Avi Gopher identified a site in Israel containing human remains and artifacts dating back 400,000 years, rewriting assumptions about when and where complex human behavior began in the biblical region. Satellite imaging along the ancient Silk Road and Arabian Peninsula has revealed dozens of previously unknown settlement patterns matching the migration routes described in Genesis. Most explosively, researchers using infrared satellite data near the Dead Sea identified two Bronze Age sites, Tal el Hammam and a neighboring location, showing evidence of catastrophic, instantaneous destruction consistent with an airburst event. Buildings melted from the outside in, pottery vitrified at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius, human skeletal remains shattered rather than burned. The destruction happened in approximately 1650 BC. The site matches the biblical coordinates of Sodom almost exactly. The science didn't set out to prove the Bible. It simply pointed a camera at the ground and found that some of what was written down 3,000 years ago was describing something real.
Beneath 35 acres of the most contested ground on Earth lies an archaeological secret that three major world religions are simultaneously desperate to uncover and terrified to expose. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem, home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, sits directly above the ruins of Solomon's Temple, the most sacred structure in Jewish history, destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC and rebuilt, then destroyed again by Rome in 70 AD. Every major religion agrees the temple existed. Every major religion disagrees violently about what should happen to the ground it stood on. And underneath that ground, almost certainly, lies the most significant archaeological deposit in the history of human civilization. The problem is that excavating it would require disturbing the third holiest site in Islam, a geopolitical trigger with the potential to ignite a conflict that security analysts have described as cataclysmic. So the site remains unexcavated, deliberately, politically. But fragments have emerged. In 2018, archaeologists discovered a 2,700-year-old seal impression bearing a name that appears in the Book of Nehemiah, the first physical artifact ever found directly corroborating a specific biblical figure outside of royalty. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted along the perimeter suggest the existence of massive subterranean chambers beneath the mount, rooms that have not been entered in 2,000 years. What's inside them is unknown. What's known is that multiple governments, intelligence agencies, and religious institutions are watching that ground extremely carefully. The moment someone starts digging, everything changes.
For nearly 2,000 years, the most damaged pages of the Ethiopian Bible sat in monastery archives, physically degraded, ink faded beyond readability, content completely inaccessible. Traditional scholarship had reached its limit. Human eyes and human translation tools simply couldn't recover what time had destroyed. Then, artificial intelligence changed that permanently. Advanced multispectral imaging, combined with AI pattern recognition, was applied to manuscripts that scholars had classified as unreadable. The technology works by detecting chemical differences in ancient ink that are completely invisible to the human eye, recovering letter shapes from surfaces that appear blank. What the AI uncovered in those damaged pages has created a genuine crisis in biblical scholarship. Complete passages, previously unknown, describing what Jesus reportedly said and taught during the 40 days between his resurrection and ascension, a period the standard Gospels cover in almost no detail. The recovered text describes a Jesus who is nothing like the distant, silent figure of Western stained glass. He warns his disciples in explicit and specific language that his teachings will be deliberately distorted, that his name will be weaponized for money and political control, that institutions will rise claiming to represent him while doing the precise opposite of everything he taught. He describes future religious leaders who perform holiness publicly while privately exploiting the vulnerable. He tells his disciples that when that time comes, his true followers won't be found in the large buildings. They'll be in the margins, in the forgotten places, in the people the powerful have discarded. The AI didn't write these words, it recovered them.
They were always there, buried in a language almost no one reads, in a country almost no one studied, in a Bible almost no one knew existed. The monks who preserved it for 2,000 years said they were guarding something the world wasn't ready for. Looking at what was just recovered, it's hard to argue they were wrong.
If you thought this was terrifying, you are not ready for what they found in the video on your screen. Click it right now. The truth is worse than you think.